Welcome back everyone, and welcome to my channel, Histories of Airliners. Today we're going to continue exploring the surviving Boeing 707s that are in museums around the world. Hold on tight as we go back into the world to see survivors of a jet airliner that not only changed its world, but made it smaller. Unlike in the first video that covered museum 707s, we will only be seeing one fully complete 707. The rest are only cockpit sections, or in one case, all that is left on display is one sheet of aluminum from the original aircraft. We once again need to visit many sites across the world to see where the surviving Boeing 707s have ended up in retirement. Our journey to find museum display Boeing 707s begins again in North America. This journey begins in a small aviation museum in Miami, Florida, known as the Wings Over Miami Air Museum. While hosting many airworthy aircraft, the aircraft in question has the smallest remnant of all the aircraft we are covering in this video. Beginning in 1966, a Boeing 707-321B was delivered to Pan American Airways and named Clipper Yankee Ranger. The aircraft was registered as November 418 Papa Alpha. The career of this aircraft lasted from 1966 to 1980. The aircraft was sold to the Israeli Aircraft Industries Corporation. This company took it apart and repurposed a majority of the aircraft. However, the cockpit section was acquired by Kermit Weeks for his Little Museum in Miami. Initially, the aircraft cockpit section was displayed outdoors with the paint scheme of a 1970s era KC-135 with new nose art included. At this time, however, the only remnant remaining is that section that has the nose art on it. 3 examples of the Boeing 707 survive on display in Europe for our European-based AV geeks. Our first stop in Europe is at the Museu do Ars in Sintra, Portugal. In this museum, you will find the cockpit section of a Boeing 707 that started life with TAP Air Portugal in October of 1968. While with TAP Air Portugal, the airplane was named after Portuguese explorer Lourenço Marques. Sometime between 1968 and 1986, the aircraft was acquired by the Zaire Air Force and then converted in late 1986 to be a presidential VIP aircraft. From 1996 to 2006, the aircraft was stored at the Lisbon airport due to the Zaire and then the follow-on Democratic Republic of the Congo governments unable to pay for the airport fees for the aircraft. A majority of the aircraft was broken up in Lisbon, Portugal, with the cockpit section going to the aforementioned Museu do Ars. I should note that the left side of the aircraft is painted in the TAP Air Portugal livery when it was delivered, and on the right hand side is painted in Portuguese Air Force colors, a group this aircraft never flew for. Across the Irish Sea in County Leitrim, in the northern parts of the Republic of Ireland, there is one 707 remnant on outdoor display. This aircraft started its passenger-paying career, as many other Boeing 707s had, with Pan Am. This aircraft was delivered in 1961 and stayed with Pan Am until 1970. From there, it would be leased to Lloyd International, but was repossessed by the bank in 1972. And then from there, it would go on to Bahamas World that same year, but again, it would be repossessed by the bank in 1984. The aircraft was broken up in Dublin, Ireland that same year, and has been on outdoor display at the Cavan and Leitrim Railway Museum ever since, along with other airplane pieces and parts. Back on continental Europe, we travel all the way to Sinsheim, Germany, to their Technik Museum to find another 707 cockpit section on display. This aircraft started out life in 1959 with American Airlines in that company's Astrojet livery, named after the state of Arkansas. By 1974, the aircraft was transferred to the Quebec-based Quebec Air. After its stay in Canada, the aircraft flew across the Atlantic Ocean to fly for United African Airlines in and out of Libya. By 1983, the aircraft was back in the United States, then flown to Brussels, and then broken up for scrap. The last part of this aircraft remains in the Technik Museum in Sinsheim, Germany. Still in Germany, we head southeast to Munich. This Boeing 707 started its paying passenger career with American Airlines in 1959, wearing the Astrojet livery. This aircraft stayed with American Airlines through many years and many flights, and a second red, white, and blue livery. Then in 1980, the aircraft was acquired by American Transair for several years of charter flights in and around North America. Boeing bought back this aircraft in 1984 and it was broken up in 1986. Since 1988, the aircraft has been on display at the Oberschleißheim Museum Munich, wearing Lufthansa colors from the 1960s. We journey almost due south to find one remnant Boeing 707 on display in Africa. This lone Boeing 707 remnant can be found at the Rand Airport just south of Johannesburg, South Africa. This airliner started life out with South African Airlines in 1969. At this time, it was named East London, or in Afrikaans, Oos-London. By 1978, this aircraft had migrated up to Luxembourg to fly with Luxair. A year later, in 1979, the aircraft moved again to Jordan to fly for Aliyah Royal Jordanian Airlines, then to Africa again to fly for Safair in 1985. The aircraft changed hands again in 1989 to fly for Liberia World Airlines. By 1995, the aircraft was back in its original country of South Africa, where it was taken up by the South African Air Force as a transport. After this, the aircraft was mostly broken up, but the cockpit section was put on display around 2011 at the aforementioned Rand Airport, where it sits today in 2024. We now travel across the Indian Ocean to visit one more example of the Boeing 707 in Australia. A confirmed example of a Boeing 707 on display is at the Historical Aircraft Restoration Society facility in Richmond, Queensland, Australia. This aircraft has been down under its entire life, from delivery to Qantas in 1968 as a Boeing 707-338C named City of Hobart. It was then renamed Alice Springs in 1974. From there, it was sold to the Royal Australian Air Force and converted into a mid-air refueler, in this case usually designated as a KC-707. In 2006, the aircraft was paid off and broken up for scrap in 2009. The cockpit section was saved in Royal Australian Air Force colors and is now on display at the Shell Harbour Airport near Wollongong in New South Wales, Australia. Our last stop on this tour is across the Pacific Ocean in the South American nation of Colombia. This last confirmed Boeing 707 is also the only one in this video that is substantially complete. This aircraft's life is one of the more unusual ones, as it did not start with Pan Am, TWA, or British Airways. In 1967, this aircraft was delivered to World Airways, operating in and out of North America until 1970. At this point, the aircraft was wet leased to Pakistan Airlines for a year, and then in 1972, the aircraft made its way over to Korean Air on another lease. By 1976, Korean Air had purchased it outright for operations with that company until 1983, wherein the Colombian Air Force appears to have used this aircraft as both a VIP transport and a mid-air refueler. At some time before 2019, the aircraft was placed at the Colombian Air Force Museum on permanent outside display. We have 3 unconfirmed listings of preserved sections of 707s. This basically means that there are records online that show a particular aircraft has been put on display, but I have not found any pictures to confirm that location. In the United Kingdom, there is supposed to be a nose section of a Boeing 707 in one of the RAF museums. This aircraft started life with Northwest Airlines in 1965, but by 1973, technology already started making the 707 obsolete. It thus went to work out of Hong Kong with Cathay Pacific. It stayed there for 9 years. By 1982, the aircraft turned up in Iceland, flying for a company called Eagle Air, just long enough to be leased by the Libyan airline known as Jamahiriya Air Transport, which became Libyan Arab Airlines in 1986. Later in 1986, the aircraft crossed the border into Egypt and flew for SAS airline in Egypt. Our last records show that this aircraft had its nose section transferred to one of the RAF museums in the United Kingdom, but we cannot confirm if either the London or Midlands location has it currently or has ever had it. We travel across the English Channel to the Paris-Orly Airport, south Paris, France. The unconfirmed report is that a Boeing 707 has its nose section sitting somewhere either in the airport itself or on display somewhere nearby. This aircraft began its life after the Boeing factory with Air France in 1962. A couple of years in its time with Air France, this aircraft would go into Air Afrique on lease starting and ending in 1964. The aircraft would make its way back to Air France by the middle of 1964 and continue flying with them until early 1976, where this aircraft was retired. By 1977, this aircraft was on display somewhere in or near the Paris-Orly Airport. Another mystery status of Boeing 707 lies south in Mexico. This, like other aircraft on our list, started its career with TWA. Its years of service with TWA were from 1967 to 1982. At this airport, the aircraft was broken up, with the exception of the nose section, which was eventually transported to a museum in Mexico. The problem is, we cannot confirm where in Mexico, and if it is it still on display today in early 2024. I mentioned the following aircraft only because it was mentioned several times to me in the comments of the previous 707 in Museums video. At the Pima Air and Space Museum in Arizona, they have an EC-135 and a KC-135. During the 1980s, they had a former TWA 707 on the grounds as a parts hole for the other two aircraft. However, per my conversation with museum personnel, this aircraft has been completely gone since the early 2000s. And the latest news I've been able to learn is that the Boeing 707, previously owned by celebrity John Travolta, is all but complete, except for recertification of the engines. I do hope they can find someone who can recertify 60-plus-year-old engines for them to work long enough to get this aircraft back to New South Wales, Australia. So there you have it, a few of the many places where you can see a preserved Boeing 707, or at least a piece of it. These planes are a reminder of a bygone era of aviation and are sure to impress any aviation enthusiast. If you're near one of these museums, I highly recommend checking it out. You won't be disappointed. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more aviation content. And don't forget to leave a comment below and let me know where your favorite place to see a Boeing 707 is.